The blood-red sunset painted the Montana territory with unforgiving strokes as Elizabeth Mackenzie stared at the letter in her trembling hands, the doctor's words blurring through her tears. 3 miscarriages in 4 years, and now this final verdict she would never bear a child. The homestead silence mocked her as she crumpled the paper in her fist, wondering how she would tell her husband when he returned from the cattle drive. The year was 1876, and in this harsh frontier where a man's legacy was measured in sons who would inherit his land and name, Elizabeth felt herself becoming less than nothing. 26 years old, and barren, the word itself felt like a curse spat from the mouths of judgmental neighbors who wouldn't understand that a woman could be more than a vessel for childbearing. She wiped her tears with her apron and stood taller. There was work to be done before nightfall. Her husband would be home tomorrow, and she would face whatever came. The doctor's letter found its way into the cook stove, curling into ash as Elizabeth moved through the routine of evening chores, each familiar task a small comfort against the emptiness growing inside her. Morning brought dust clouds on the horizon. Ezra Woodson was returning with the herd, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Elizabeth straightened her dress and pinched color into her cheeks before stepping onto the porch of their modest homestead. The cattle lowed in the distance as they approached, driven by Ezra and the 3 ranch hands they'd managed to hire this season. Ezra dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his tall frame and broad shoulders silhouetted against the bright sky. At 31, his face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes still carried the warmth that had first drawn Elizabeth to him when they'd met back east 5 years ago. "Lizzie," he called, crossing the yard in long strides. He swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. The drive went better than expected, got top dollar for every head. She buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and trail dust. "I missed you," she said, postponing the inevitable conversation. Ezra set her down and studied her face. "Something's wrong," he said, his smile fading. "Tell me." Elizabeth led him inside, away from the curious eyes of the ranch hands. In the privacy of their home, she sat him down at the kitchen table and poured him coffee with hands that refused to stay steady. "Dr. Grayson's letter came while you were gone," she said, her voice thin as she sat across from him. He says I can't have children, Ezra, not ever." The silence that followed stretched between them like a physical thing. Elizabeth watched her husband's face, searching for disgust or disappointment, steeling herself for rejection. Ezra set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. "Is that all?" he asked. Elizabeth blinked. "All." "Ezra, I cannot give you sons. Your family name is just that, a name," he interrupted. He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Lizzie, when I married you, I didn't marry a breeding mare. I married the woman who reads Shakespeare by lamplight, who can outshoot most men I know, and who stood by me when we lost everything in that bank collapse and had to start over out here." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. "But everyone can go to hell," Ezra said firmly. "This is our life, not theirs. The ranch," she protested weakly. "Who will inherit will cross that bridge when we come to it," he said. "There are plenty of children in this world who need homes, but right now I need you to understand something." He squeezed her hands. "Your worth isn't in your womb, Lizzie. It's in your heart and your mind and that stubborn spirit that keeps us going when times get hard." Elizabeth wanted desperately to believe him, but years of societal expectations weren't easily dismissed. "You say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow and the day after that," Ezra insisted. "Now come here." He pulled her onto his lap and held her close as she finally allowed herself to cry, not just for the children they would never have, but for the weight of failure she'd been carrying alone. The following weeks were difficult. Elizabeth threw herself into ranch work with renewed vigor, as if proving her worth through labor could fill the void inside her. Ezra watched her with concern but gave her the space she needed, understanding that grief took time. Word spread quickly in the small community. Elizabeth felt the stares when she rode into town for supplies, heard the whispers that stopped abruptly when she approached. Mrs. Patterson from the general store asked pointedly about adoption options while her teenage daughter looked on with pity. Reverend Simmons offered prayers for acceptance of God's will that felt more like judgment than comfort. It was during the church social in late summer that things came to a head. Elizabeth overheard Vivian Hollister, wife of the banker and mother of 6, speaking to a circle of women. "Such a shame about Elizabeth Woodson," Vivian said, her voice carrying deliberately. "Ezra comes from good stock. He deserves a wife who can provide him with heirs. My cousin in St. Louis would be perfect for him should he decide to seek an annulment." Elizabeth froze, punch cup halfway to her lips. Before she could react, Ezra appeared at her side, his hand firm at the small of her back. "Mrs. Hollister," he called, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I couldn't help overhearing your concern for my marital situation." The woman had the decency to flush. "I was merely observing, then allow me to make an observation of my own," Ezra said pleasantly, though his eyes were hard. "My wife may not bear sons, but her strength raises every soul around her. While you've been counting your blessings by the children in your parlor, Elizabeth has been teaching reading to the Cheyenne children on the reservation, nursing half the town through last winter's influenza, and keeping our ranch profitable through the worst drought in a decade." The social had gone silent, all eyes on them. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burning but stood straighter beside her husband. "I'd appreciate it," Ezra continued, "if you'd keep your thoughts about my marriage to yourself, and you can tell your cousin in St. Louis that I'm spoken for now and always." He guided Elizabeth outside, away from the stunned faces and uncomfortable silence. Under the cottonwood trees behind the church, she finally found her voice. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Ezra replied. "I'm tired of watching you shrink every time someone looks at you with pity. You are so much more than what your body can or cannot do." Elizabeth shook her head. "But they're right, Ezra. What kind of legacy will we leave without children?" "Legacy isn't just bloodlines," he said firmly. "It's what we build together, the lives we touch." He took her hands in his. "Remember when we first came here? This land was raw and most folks said we'd never make it, but we did because of you, your planning, your determination. Every seed we've planted, every head of cattle we've raised, every connection we've made with our neighbors, that's our legacy too." For the first time since the doctor's letter, Elizabeth allowed herself to consider a different future than the one she'd always imagined, one where worth wasn't measured in children but in impact. Autumn came to the Montana territory with early frosts and the promise of a hard winter ahead. As October wound down, word reached the scattered homesteads and ranches that a group of settlers had been stranded by an early blizzard in the mountain pass 20 miles north. Their wagon train had left too late in the season, a fatal miscalculation that had cost them supplies and lives. Sheriff Mills organized a rescue party. Ezra volunteered immediately, and to his surprise, Elizabeth insisted on joining. "Those people will need medical attention," she argued when he protested. "I'm the only one besides Doc Grayson with any training, and he's too old for the journey." "It's dangerous, Lizzie," Ezra warned. "The weather will be just as dangerous for those children up there," she countered. "I'm going." Her determination won out. The rescue party departed the next morning, 6 men, Elizabeth, and pack horses loaded with supplies. The journey was brutal, fighting through snow already knee-deep in places. By the time they reached the stranded settlers on the 3rd day, Elizabeth was exhausted but focused. What they found was devastating. Of the 12 wagons that had started the journey, only 8 remained. 27 survivors huddled in makeshift shelters, including 11 children. The dead had been buried in frozen graves marked with crude crosses. Elizabeth moved among them with quiet efficiency, treating frostbite and pneumonia, distributing food and blankets. A young mother, barely 20, clung to Elizabeth's sleeve as she examined the woman's feverish infant. "Please," the woman begged, "save my son, he's all I have left." My husband died 3 days ago. Elizabeth worked through the night, boiling snow for clean water, making poultices from the herbs she'd brought, singing softly to the crying baby as his mother finally succumbed to exhausted sleep. By morning, the infant's fever had broken, and Elizabeth found herself rocking him, studying his tiny features with a combination of joy and heartache. Ezra found her like that, silhouetted against the dawn light filtering through the wagon cover. "You saved him," he said softly. Elizabeth nodded, blinking back tears. "His name is David. His mother says they were heading to Oregon to meet her brother," she swallowed. "She has no one else, Ezra, no one to help her." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Plenty of room at our place until spring," he said casually. "They could stay with us until the pass is clear." The journey back was slower, the rescued settlers weakened by their ordeal. Elizabeth rode with the infant bundled against her chest, his mother Hannah Brady following in one of the wagons. The other survivors would be distributed among the town and surrounding ranches until spring. By the time they reached home, news of the rescue had spread, and the same community that had whispered behind Elizabeth's back now came forward with offers of help. Mrs. Patterson donated fabric for new clothes. The blacksmith's wife organized a quilting circle. Even Vivian Hollister arrived with a basket of preserves and a subdued expression. "What you did was brave," Vivian said awkwardly as she handed over the basket. I may have misjudged you, Mrs. Woodson." Elizabeth accepted the piece, offering with grace. "We all have different strengths, Mrs. Hollister. Mine just don't include childbearing." As winter settled in, Hannah and baby David became part of the household rhythm. Elizabeth taught the young widow practical skills: cooking, sewing, basic medical care, while Hannah's fresh perspective and determination brought new energy to the ranch. The baby thrived under their combined care, his first smile and tentative coos celebrating small victories against the harsh winter. One evening, as snow piled against the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, Ezra watched Elizabeth showing Hannah how to knit. David slept in a cradle Ezra had crafted from pine boards. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Hannah will need help starting over when she reaches Oregon." Elizabeth looked up, her knitting needles pausing. "Yes, I've been putting aside some money and supplies for her journey." "What if she didn't have to go?" Ezra suggested. "The Thornton place adjacent to our north pasture is sitting empty since old Amos died. It's small but sound. If she wanted to stay in the area, we could help her get established there." Hannah's eyes widened. "You do that for us. But why?" "Because you're family now," Elizabeth said simply, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not by blood, but by choice." "And choice is sometimes stronger than blood," Ezra added, meeting his wife's gaze with understanding. Spring brought new life to the land, green shoots pushing through melting snow. Hannah decided to stay, moving into the Thornton cabin with David. She proved to have a talent with chickens and garden vegetables, trading eggs and produce for help with heavier farm work. The arrangement benefited everyone, and Elizabeth found herself spending afternoons with David while Hannah worked, reading to him and carrying him through the fields to name flowers and birds. "You're so good with him," Hannah observed one day as Elizabeth returned with a sleeping David. "It isn't fair that you can't have children of your own." Elizabeth smoothed the baby's dark curls. "I used to think that too, but I'm learning that family takes many forms." She smiled at the younger woman. "You and David have brought so much into our lives, I wouldn't trade that for anything." As the months passed, their unusual family arrangement became accepted in the community. Elizabeth's standing grew as she continued her work teaching at the reservation and assisting Dr. Grayson with medical emergencies. When a flash flood threatened the Lower Valley farms in late summer, it was Elizabeth who organized the sandbagging effort that saved 3 homesteads. Sheriff Mills clapped Ezra on the shoulder afterward. "Your wife is something else, Woodson. Don't know what this town would do without her." "I tell her that every day," Ezra replied proudly, "but she's still learning to believe it." The change in their lives accelerated when a letter arrived from the territorial government. The nearest school was 30 miles away, leaving many children without formal education. Officials were seeking qualified individuals to establish schools in underserved areas. "You should apply," Ezra urged when Elizabeth showed him the notice. "You've been teaching informally for years." "Me, a proper school teacher?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I never finished my own education after Father died. You know more than most college graduates I've met," Ezra insisted. "You're already teaching the reservation children and helping David learn his letters. This would just make it official and paid." The idea took root. With Ezra's encouragement, Elizabeth submitted her application, including testimonials from parents whose children she had taught. 2 months later, authorization came to establish a school, along with a small stipend for supplies and her teacher's salary. The community rallied behind the project. A vacant building at the edge of town was renovated for classes. Families donated lumber, nails, and labor. Even Vivian Hollister contributed desks from her husband's bank when they purchased new furniture. On the school's opening day, Elizabeth stood before 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, including 3 Cheyenne children from the reservation, an integration almost unheard of in 1878. Her hands trembled as she picked up the chalk, but when she turned to the eager faces before her, something settled in her soul. "Today," she began, "we start building something that will outlast all of us." That evening, she returned home to find Ezra waiting with a special dinner and wildflowers on the table. "To celebrate our schoolmarm," he said, pulling out her chair with a flourish. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. Elizabeth leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she hadn't been since the doctor's devastating news. "I've been thinking about what you said last year," she said softly. "About legacy being more than bloodlines." Ezra nodded, his arm tightening around her. "Today I looked at those children, all those different faces looking to me for guidance, and I realized that maybe this is my purpose," Elizabeth continued. "Not to create life with my body, but to shape lives with my mind and heart." "You've always had that power," Ezra said. "I saw it the first time I met you, challenging that lecturer about women's education at your father's dinner party. You lit up the room with your conviction." Elizabeth smiled at the memory. "Father was mortified." "I was enchanted," Ezra corrected, "and I still am every day." The next 2 years brought profound changes to their community. Elizabeth's school thrived, expanding to 32 students. With the railroad's arrival, new settlers poured into the territory, bringing diversity and challenges. Elizabeth and Hannah established a lending library in a corner of the school, collecting donated books and ordering others with funds raised through community socials. David grew into a sturdy toddler who divided his time between the 2 households, considering both his home. Other children found their way to Elizabeth, as well, a 12-year-old orphan boy whose uncle couldn't manage him, twin girls whose mother died in childbirth, a shy Cheyenne child gifted in mathematics but struggling with English. Elizabeth's nurturing extended beyond classroom hours, providing food, clothing, and emotional support where needed. In the summer of 1880, tragedy struck when a wildfire swept through the Eastern Valley. 3 families lost everything, including the Millers, whose 3 children attended Elizabeth's school. With their parents hospitalized in Helena with severe burns, the children ages 8, 6, and 4 had nowhere to go. "They can stay with us until their parents recover," Elizabeth told Ezra without hesitation. "The spare room is ready." Ezra studied his wife's determined face. "You know their burns are bad, Lizzie. Recovery could take months if it comes at all." "Then they'll stay months," she replied simply. "We have the space and means. Would you have me turn them away?" The Miller children arrived with nothing but the clothes they wore. Elizabeth welcomed them with warm baths, new nightclothes sewn from her fabric stores, and a hearty meal. That night, as the exhausted children finally slept, Ezra found his wife sitting beside their beds, watching over them with fierce protectiveness. "You amaze me," he whispered, drawing her gently from the room. "The way you open your heart, even knowing it might get broken." Elizabeth leaned into his embrace. "That's the risk with loving anything, isn't it? But what's the alternative? A safe, small life where nothing hurts because nothing matters." 2 weeks later, word came that Mrs. Miller had succumbed to her injuries. Mr. Miller remained in critical condition, his recovery uncertain. The children clung to Elizabeth when she broke the news, their grief raw and overwhelming. She held them through nightmares and tears, establishing routines to provide stability amid chaos. Mr. Miller died in early October without regaining consciousness. The children, now orphans in legal terms, faced separation into different homes unless a single family took all three. "They stay with us," Elizabeth declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We'll apply for formal guardianship." Ezra nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "I've spoken with Judge Parker. He's sympathetic but warns that the territorial courts generally prefer blood relatives." "They have an uncle in Chicago who's never even met them," Elizabeth said, indignant. "How could that be better than staying where they're already healing with people who love them?" The legal battle stretched through winter. Elizabeth and Ezra traveled to Helena 3 times for court appearances, presenting character references and evidence of their suitable home. The Miller children's uncle contested the guardianship from afar, but refused to travel west to make his case in person. Finally, in February 1881, Judge Parker granted permanent guardianship to the Woodsons, with the provision that the children maintain correspondence with their uncle. "The court finds that the best interest of these children lies in stability and demonstrated care, not merely in blood connection," the judge declared. "The Woodsons have proven themselves exemplary guardians in action, not just intent." The journey home was jubilant, the children secure in the knowledge that they wouldn't be uprooted again. Emma, the eldest at 9, sat beside Elizabeth in the wagon. "Does this mean we can call you Mother now?" she asked hesitantly. Elizabeth's heart swelled. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Emma. But yes, in all the ways that matter, I am your mother now." That spring, they expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and extending the kitchen. Hannah and David were frequent visitors, their cabin just a 20-minute walk away. The unusual family configuration raised eyebrows among newcomers, but had become accepted among longtime residents. Elizabeth's 30th birthday arrived in April with a surprise party organized by her students and family. As twilight fell and children played in the yard, Elizabeth found a quiet moment with Ezra on their porch swing. "Did you ever imagine our life would look like this?" she asked, watching as David chased the Miller children in a game of tag, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Not exactly like this," Ezra admitted, "but I always knew life with you would be extraordinary." He took her hand, tracing the calluses that spoke of hard work and purpose. "Remember when you first got that letter from Dr. Grayson? You thought your value was diminished because you couldn't bear sons." Elizabeth nodded, remembering the depth of that despair. "Look at what you've built instead," Ezra continued, gesturing toward their expanded homestead, the children playing, Hannah setting dessert on the outdoor tables. "You've mothered dozens of children through your school. You've created a home for children who lost everything. You've built bridges between settlers and the Cheyenne that no one thought possible." "We've built this life together," Elizabeth corrected gently. "Yes, but you're its heart," Ezra insisted. "Your strength truly has raised every soul around you, mine most of all." Elizabeth leaned into her husband's embrace, watching as Emma called the younger children to the table for cake. 4 years ago, she had believed her life's purpose was lost with her ability to bear children. Now she understood that purpose wasn't singular or predefined, it was created daily through choices, love, and persistence. "I was thinking," Ezra said casually, "that cabin past our south fence needs fixing up, might make a good place for an older boy who needs stability." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. Joseph Blackfeather. She asked, naming a 14-year-old Cheyenne student whose father had been killed in a logging accident. Ezra nodded. He's got a good head for numbers. Could help with the ranch accounts while finishing school. His mother seems agreeable if we make it a proper apprenticeship. Our family keeps growing in unexpected ways, Elizabeth mused, smiling. The best families do, Ezra replied, pulling her close as the Montana sunset painted the sky in triumphant colors, illuminating the legacy they had built, one stronger than blood, more enduring than a name, created through love that recognized worth beyond convention. In the gathering twilight, Elizabeth watched her assembled family children who came to her through tragedy and chance, neighbors who had become kin, a community strengthened by connection rather than division. She had once measured her value by what her body could not do. Now she understood that true strength lay in what her heart and hands had built, a legacy of compassion that would outlast any bloodline, raising souls and changing lives in ways that would ripple outward long after she was gone.